Hi, I'm Vic Perri and welcome to Face to Face, and tonight we're chatting with David Menadue. David, how are you? Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, nice to be here.
Now, what's your role? What do you actually do now?
Well, I suppose my major roles are being Vice President of People Living with AIDS Victoria and National President of the National Association of People with HIV AIDS.
Yeah, that's big stuff, big responsibility.
Well, it keeps me busy, yeah.
Now, that's something that most people out there will know, I suppose, over many years. But did David Menadue have a life before HIV?
Well, it was a quieter one.
A quieter one?
Yeah, no, I was a teacher and an editor of children's magazines for a number of years. I had a good life. I was feeling fairly relaxed and comfortable until, what year was it? Early 30s when I was diagnosed with HIV.
Well, before that, where were you born?
I was a country boy. Lived in northern Victoria. Raised. My father was a shearer, so I lived on a kind of rural block with lots of animals and sheep and God knows what else, and lived in a very small country town. And basically, I suppose, was not really one of the boys in the kind of, being a member of the football team and all that sort of stuff.
I was going to ask, the football club. And
I was a bit out of the masculine mould when it came to, that kind of rural boy thing, but I survived.
What about your family? Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, no, I was the eldest of six. My eldest brother was a football hero, and I was sort of more into what would we say, theatrical things.
The theatrical type,
yeah,
the
absolutely.
studious type. Yeah.
Very much the academic studious.
So you went to local school. So what town?
Well, look, the actual town that we lived in was called Menadue, which no one's ever heard of.
Menadue.
The biggest sheep station in the world.
That one. Yeah.
Menadue. No. It's an Aboriginal name, in fact. Yeah. It means boomerang or something. But the point of it all is it was near a town called Numurkah, which people may have heard of, and that's near a town called Shepparton, which you hopefully have heard of.
I think most people
anything
know
about Victoria, Shepparton's.
And what were you like at school? What sort of kid?
No, I was
were you a little terror?
No,
like
Vic.
Me?
Oh, you're... Well,
I was, but...
No, I was the responsible eldest, of six. So I had to look after my little charges who were, underneath me. No, I was probably too much of a goody-goody responsible type, really. I learned to be a little bit different later in life.
And how long were you living in that town? Did you sort of go to high school? And
Yeah. In fact, that was good, to have a bit of stability. I had the same teacher for all of my primary school. Virtually.
Oh, okay.
So, you had...
But it would have been
constancy.
A small school, I suppose, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was 30 or 40 people, but 40 kids. But that was good. I think, I'm a fairly literate individual, and I actually put that down to really good teaching from a teacher that I had, well, certainly from years 3 to 6, I had the same teacher, and, it was that level of engagement with you as a person that I think was good.
And so you obviously there was a local high school in that
town?
Or
Well, the local high school was 5 mile down the track, but even that was a good school. It was a lot bigger, 600 students compared to the 30 I was used to, so it was a bit threatening for a little boy who probably, I think, was a target of bullies, like a lot of gay boys are. Oh, absolutely. The bus prefect used to, make me sit on the wheel of the bus right in front of me and in front of him.
On the wheel?
Yeah. And I was his little toy that he used to taunt and, do things like pull your trousers down and, the stuff the horrible stuff of bullies. Now, he wouldn't do it to any other kid. It was just me because I was different.
And so they did, you obviously didn't sort of come out, but they...
Well, they picked up you weren't into footy, you weren't into cricket, you had a different style about you. I mean, you weren't one that would readily get into scraps and stand up for yourself in that same
So it was a
way.
pretty terrible time?
Yeah, it wasn't a good time. I mean, I didn't enjoy the early years of high school, most particularly, because I'd be avoiding bullies.
So at the end of high school, though, you went on to...
Yeah, well,
uni?
see, the way I survived and the way I managed to gain my confidence as an individual was by being articulate and an academic, and being able to sort of outfox a bully with, mentally.
Yeah.
But proving to them I could be the top of the class, whereas they, might be able to beat me on the footy ground or whatever, but they couldn't beat me when it came to words or...
And in the long run, obviously later in life when you're out in the world trying to get a decent job...
Well, I think I've done a lot better than them, probably, in the scheme of things.
So at the end of high school, did you... You went to uni, obviously, yeah? Where'd you go?
Went to Melbourne Uni, which was good.
So you had to move...
Well, and actually that is a real difficulty for a lot of... I don't know whether it still is for country boys, hopefully not. But that move from the country to the city, when you know nobody, and a hell of a lot... In those days, country kids wouldn't go to the city, they were too scared of it, which is amazing. We're talking the 70s.
Right.
And they prefer to stay close to their family and that sort of, the comfort of the local community, whereas I had to make a big, brave step to the city. But I knew I had to. I had to discover what, other people like me, in other words, as I was to discover other gay people. And I was lucky because while I was in an education department hostel, there happened to be a group of gay guys there that sort of... I don't think we knew we were gay, but just oscillated to each other.
All right.
We called ourselves the Golden Nine.
Oh, okay. But there were little indications.
Well, I was the one that first broached it. I said I'd had sex with a man one night, and the floodgates opened. They all admitted they were doing the beats at the university, and they were doing this, that, and the other thing. So, in other words, we were there. We didn't know why we were so attached to each other, and we did everything together. But as it turned out, that whole, peer support thing was happening for us anyway. So I found that group really useful because we then discovered the gay scene together as much as it was in the 70s. It wasn't particularly glamorous or
What was that?
exciting.
What?
Well,
do you remember the name of any?
The Woolshed.
The Woolshed.
Used to be
a lot
called
of people remember that.
Well, that's right. It used to be called the Snake Pit. And it was full of some pretty rough types. For a gay bar, it was a remarkably rough place to hang out.
I'm just trying to picture it. Would it have been because of the nature of the place? Was it a mixed crowd of apart from people who
Well,
didn't identify?
apparently before the Woolshed was, when I sort of walked into it, it used to have an upstairs bar where the kind of business toffee types would go, and then the downstairs bar was where your more rough trade would hang out. Mind you, if you wanted to, some of the business types wanted to pick up a bit of rough trade, they went down the Snake Pit. But the point of it all is, I think, it was a mixture of people that basically... some of your working class gays, some of your, I gather, even some of the local crims that go there, they'd get out of jail and they'd be looking to find their place, in society, and they'd think, the Queens would be a good, they'll set me up for a weekend, and probably they'd frisk them of all their possessions. But the point is, you did notice there was a rough edge to it. I'm not saying it was all like that, but it was not the kind of gay bars we're probably used to now.
So how'd you go at uni? What sort of... You obviously just kept going, like you excelled in what you did?
Well, I actually think the peer group that I established around me happened to be, literate art students in most cases, and they helped me through. But it was a lonely time, though, because a lot of students in those days, at Melbourne Uni, for instance, were all private school students. And here I came from a country high school, and I hadn't, those sort of networks or confidence. They were all Prus or Phoebes that sort of, knew each other from private school.
Yeah. So what career, what sort of direction did you see yourself going?
No, I didn't have a choice. I was under a studentship, which meant I had to be a teacher for 3 years, which...
That was it? That...
Oh, in those days, that was the only way I could afford to go through uni.
Okay, yeah.
There was no HECS or those kind of scholarships. You either got a Commonwealth scholarship, you got a studentship to become a teacher, or your parents paid for you to go through uni.
And where did you teach?
I got sent to a small country high school called Rochester, north of Bendigo, which is a bit of fun, really. I mean, I wasn't meant to be a teacher. I wasn't, cut out to be that sort of butch, you do this, kid, or else. But I survived. I mean, I ran the school musical the first year, which made me kind of, I don't know, popular in one respect, because the kids all wanted to be in the school musical. So they worked with me, and we did a thing called The Boyfriend, which was fun.
So you actually went back to the country then, after sort of doing your study in the city. You went back to the country. How long did you stay there for before you came back to
2 years. I was desperate to get back to the city because I wanted to discover my gay identity. I mean, you had to be fairly closeted in the 70s.
And you were in Rochester?
Yeah, I mean, a few members of the staff knew I was gay, but to be quite honest, it wasn't something you were going to wear on your sleeve.
I mean, even today we know that there are teachers who identify as gay but don't come out for the obvious reason.
Well, fear the community won't accept or whatever. I mean, you've got to be in a fairly liberal environment, and a small dairy producing country town in the 70s and probably even still in the 90s, that's too confronting for them.
So what did you do when you came back to Melbourne?
I taught in a primary school for a year, and then was really fortunate. I had one of the best jobs I could ever imagine. I've always wanted to be a writer in many respects, but didn't have the money to go to a journalism course when I was a student. So, and I just happened to move into an area where I was editing children's magazines. So that was a great career move, because I learned how to write, basically.
Yeah.
Learned how to communicate in a different way.
That's good. And how long did you do that for?
14 years.
14 years?
Yes. Oh, I loved it. Every day was a godsend, really. I really enjoyed it.
We'll have to talk more about that in a minute. You're watching Face to Face, and we'll be back after this short break. And welcome back to Face to Face. I'm Vic Perri, and tonight we're chatting with David Menadue. Welcome back. All right, we were talking about your childhood and all that background stuff, and a lot of people are probably out there thinking, what about the current life of David Menadue? Now, what year were you diagnosed with HIV?
84.
84. That's a long time ago. Yeah.
It is, and I when I was diagnosed, I was told by my doctor that I probably had a 1 in 10 chance of getting AIDS, because they thought it was like hepatitis, where only some people actually develop, the antibodies actually protected you.
Right.
But in fact, that turned out to be wrong. So for a few years in the 80s, I thought, oh, look, 1 in 10 chance of getting AIDS, I'll be right. So I was almost in a kind of AIDS denial. I thought, I'm not going to get sick. I'm going to be one of those ones that survives forever.
So how did you feel when the doctor told you then?
Well, see, I wasn't too panicked because of that 1 in 10 thing,
yeah.
Whereas if I'd been diagnosed later, like in the 80s, the late 80s, when the real facts were about, like people saying 100% of people are going to get AIDS and you're probably all going to die, I may have been more panicked. But of course, as the 80s got on, I got a little bit more panicked.
Yeah. So he didn't give you a time, he didn't say, oh, you've got a couple of years.
No, none of that.
None
of this 6 months or
so
12 months.
Chance.
No. It was like you might have a relatively normal life, and who knows? I mean, there was no treatments, so that was the major concern, that if you did get sick, there probably wasn't much you could do about it.
Well, what about disclosure? Because disclosure is a huge issue, and it's an ongoing issue for positive people.
It was the big issue for me, Vic, because, I didn't think, at that stage, I thought, well, if I've got it, a lot of other people will get it. But the reality, or have it. But the reality was, a lot of people wouldn't get tested, because I thought, what's the point? There's no treatments, and so I was one of the few people in my circle of friends that actually got tested at all. And I wanted to, because I didn't think it was, from my point of view, being gay and coming out as gay was, an important part of who I was, and I didn't want to have another secret like that, about HIV. I just wanted to know. But it was a very lonely time, and it was only sort of about 2 or 3 years after I'd been diagnosed that I actually found another positive person to talk to and sort of confide in. So, that was difficult, and I think, unfortunately, I then joined a peer support group, which was a great, important thing, where a whole group of us decided we'd just meet in each other's homes. We called ourselves Melbourne Positive Friends, and it was a very important group for me, but part of the problem, of course, is when you're involving yourself in a positive-only group, quite a lot of those people then start to get sick, and people start to die, and so you're actually going to lots of funerals and surrounding yourself with a fair bit of grief. So, it was a difficult time. And every time that happened, you thought you were going to be the next one.
Next person, And that's how you felt every time you went to a funeral? You thought that could be me?
Well, to some degree. I mean, as I said, I was in a little bit of denial. I kept thinking I'm going to be okay, but at the end of the day, you could see some physical changes happening in your body, and certainly your energy levels were dropping, and as I said, there was no treatments. And I think we all had nagging problems like thrush in the mouth and bad skin problems, and if you actually analysed it, we were, as a group, sort of suffering from immune deficiency.
So I was going to say, so they were signs that your immune system was being damaged and something was going on. What about the regular monitoring of T-cell counts and viral load? And T-cell counts, of course, basically measure the function of the immune system. They tell you how the immune system's going. And the viral load is a measure of how much virus is in your body. Were they around back then?
They were around. Not so much the viral load that, of course, only came in the 90s, but the CD4s, and I think what was happening with my CD4s is they're going down about 200 every year. It started at 900 in 84 when I was diagnosed. By 88, they were sort of around the danger mark, the 200s. And that's when I got offered AZT, which just became available in 88.
88, yeah.
That was a horrible experience.
Right, yeah.
Not something that, I think in some ways helped me a lot, because they didn't know the right dose. They had me on 1200 mg, and anyone knows now that AZT you'd be on half that dose. And you had to take it every 4 hours, so you actually had to wake yourself up at 4 o'clock in the morning and take a dose, and you had to have a little alarm thing with you. Like some people do that now. But this was every 4 hours, which turned out to be all wrong. They discovered that, they didn't know enough about the drug, and now you'd only have to take it twice a day if you're on AZT, and you'd be on half the dose and it wouldn't be as toxic.
Yeah. Well, that was a problem back then too, because of the higher dose. There were a lot of side effects.
Well, I think it's arguable that some people got sick because of the drug. And I'm not saying it's not a good drug, but they were giving it to you wrong.
And I've spoken to some people who are convinced that AZT killed people, that the way that it was...
it probably contributed to them getting sick, because I know, I'd have to rush off to the sick bay at work while I was on it. I'd lose weight and I didn't feel like eating. I mean, those are things that didn't seem to be happening with me because of HIV, but as soon as I started taking the AZT. But equally, it might have kept me alive. I mean, obviously I'm still here. So.
And you are, yeah. What about support? What was the support like? In terms of services?
Not great until the late 80s. The AIDS Council was spending a lot of time doing preventative work, and there was some support if you were sick, very sick.
Right.
But if you're in my situation where you probably needed peer support, it wasn't really until the late 80s, early 90s that we were starting to have actual support groups for positive guys. I mean, there was for gay men learning to sort of prevent themselves from getting infected. But positive people were a little bit later in the picture.
What about on a global level? We knew what was happening in Australia, but what about other countries?
We knew a lot about America, of course, because that's where we, think the transmission route started. And I learned to pick up the word AIDS in a newspaper. I knew it was there. I just had a sixth sense. I'd pick it up and read anything about AIDS. You just devoured it because you wanted to know what the latest developments were, and I mean, it was. So I think we learned a fair bit about the global scene, but not, what's happening in Africa and stuff. I mean, that's, the ongoing tragedy of all tragedies. It's just out of all proportion.
It's just incredible. I know that I was reading somewhere the stats in South Africa. I think while in Australia the annual rate is about 600 or 700 a year, is that much every 8 minutes or something in South Africa, which is just unbelievable. And what about now your role with PLWHA? So you're the vice president. Now you're on how many? Probably 20 or 30 committees.
Well, that's the problem. Is too few people want to be involved in this kind of advocacy, and I mean, I just think it's essential that positive people have a visible face. I mean, that's where I became involved early in the 80s, really, and that's how people got to know my name as associated with HIV, because there were very few people wanted to be open because of the fear of discrimination. But I was lucky. I mean, I had a gay boss at that stage. I felt fairly secure in my employment. My family was supportive, and so I was able to do it. I mean, even today you'll find people will find it a very difficult thing to come out publicly.
Oh, still. Yeah.
But I think, I'm in a situation now that I personally have not felt much discrimination. And I felt there's still a lot of things to be done, so I think it's important that people do media work or do write about HIV and just keep it in people's faces.
And so what is PLWHA Victoria? I should explain, people living with HIV AIDS Victoria, which is an organisation in Melbourne. What do they do?
Well, we basically advocate with government or, various HIV service providers to make sure that everything's as good as it can be in terms of service provision for people with HIV. Or if we need policies changed or sort of broad improvement in health services for people with HIV, that's the sort of stuff we do. But we also do individual advocacy. People come to us if they've had trouble with a service provider or they've been discriminated against, people being refused gym membership or silly things that still happen on a regular basis. People are discriminated against, so we'll take up their case. Either, refer them to a lawyer if need be, or, do the sort of written legwork to try and get them to sort of get some justice and redress to their discrimination.
And you also do the famous now PLWHA interactive events.
Yes.
And there was one a couple of weeks ago. What are they about?
Well, they're about educating people in a fun way about treatments particularly, because it's pretty important that people understand treatments. In HIV, you've almost got to be your own doctor. So because it's really complex and difficult, but it's absolutely crucial for people's health, we think we've got to provide an entertaining, fun forum. That's why we have Vanessa along, and we think we really have got a level of engagement with the community around these events. And, I think...
And they're very popular.
Yep.
Very popular. Thanks, David. That's fantastic. We've run out of time. You're watching Face to Face. I'm Vic Perri, and we'll see you next time.